Hello, this is János, Real World Audio, and this is another video from the car in the UCLA. So I'm not at home, I'm 5,000 kilometers or 3,000 miles away. So that's why I'm making these impromptu videos. So today I'm going to talk about sound pressure levels. So that was a question that I received, and part of that was, where do I get my numbers from when I mention SPL levels? So actually, some of my numbers I get from NIOSH, NIOSH. So those are, I would say, the official numbers in the United States, and that NIOSH, they do official measurements that are used for official purposes, such as, for example, if you are working at a construction or you are a musician, what are the acceptable noise floor levels and where you can get workers' compensations, and what are the official limits and numbers when you can file for claims that they are officially affecting your hearing if you are being subjected to loud noises at work. Also, what you can do, what I can do, what I did, I also read reports when people report on SPLs, and some of it are when you do that, I always recommend to do a check on it and be aware what kind of measurements they use, because different measuring methods, while they give you the same number, can be vastly different. So do not ever take anyone's SPL reports as written in stone. Always just use it as a guidepost, and think in your mind plus minus 20 dB for your purposes. I will explain in a minute why take anyone's measurement as plus minus 20 dB as far as it relates to you. Before I get into it, a few references, and that's why I say plus minus 20 dB, because for you, what a quiet room means is vastly different what it means for another person. For example, why? Are you in a metropolis? Are you in downtown New York? There, a quiet room is very different than a quiet room in Alaska. If you live in Alaska, in the middle of I don't know where, like next to a lake, and you don't have any neighbors, nothing there, the noise floor is extremely different from the quiet sound floor in New York, in the middle of downtown. So that's one thing. So in a living room, the noise floor is not just dependent on where you live. For example, between like Alaska or anywhere in the world, in a quiet rural area versus a metropolis, the difference between the noise floor can be as big as 50 decibels or even greater. And yes, that's an extreme number, but I'm talking about the extremes. And whatever you will be measuring at home will most likely fall between those two numbers. However, why I said plus minus 20 dB is because there is no such thing as an absolute noise floor. So let's say, my room is like 41 dB noise floor or 27 dB noise floor, because you can measure 41 dB in two different rooms, and yet, so the number is the same, like 41 in two different rooms, and when you enter those two different rooms, there can be a vast difference on what the sound floor is, what how low level details you can experience in the room, and how oppressive that noise is for you, and how it impacts music. And the reason for that is that in any room, the noise floor is not even. So when you just measure a noise floor, it means that there's like an average provided to you. But the human ear doesn't have an average sensitivity. It doesn't work like that. Very different. So it's kind of like taking big beans, small beans, putting them in a coffee grinder, and you get a mix. And the coffee grinder will give you the same mix no matter the bean size. And it will just give you an average taste. But if you have like different kinds of coffees, when you sample them, they will be different, but you put them all mixed in the grinder, it will give you an average, but it won't tell you what sort of beans they were in the beginning. Okay, this was a really lame analogy, and I realized it's not going anywhere. So now I just quit finding quickly an analogy. So I'm going just to talk about what's going on with the noise floor and your perception. So the human ear is most sensitive in the mid-range. So if your noise floor predominantly falls in the mid-range frequencies, it will be very obtrusive, very bad, and you will have a problem with that. That will severely limit your dynamic range, and you will need a system that has peak SPL capabilities a lot higher to make the dynamic range of the music palatable for you from your stereo system. Now, let's say that 41 dB noise floor that you measured mostly falls in the mid-range, you are toast. It means that room is not acceptable as a room to provide an adequate playing field for perceiving the dynamic range of music. In that room, you will be only able to enjoy very compressed music, and that's because the music starts at 41 dB and higher in the mid-range. That's really, really limited. Now, if you have a different room and you measured 41 there too, but it's predominantly, let's say, 30 hertz, and in the mid-range frequencies, it's just like 12 dB. So even though both measure 41, but the first room, the noise floor, where your ear, that counts the most for your ear, in the mid-range, that's where the ear calibrates the noise floor. So can you hear the speech or you cannot hear the speech? In the first room, you cannot hear the speech below 41 dB. So you have to crank up your stereo so that the quietest part of the music is 41 dB. In the other room, where it mostly falls, let's say, at the 30 hertz region, or maybe 30 and 50 hertz, maybe you have a refrigerator or a water cooler running that's providing like a 50 hertz component, and you have like 12 dB in the mid-range. There, the mid-range and the range of music starts at 12 dB. So now we have 29 dB difference between these two rooms that you can use for music. And yes, you will be able to hear your fridge humming when you listen to music, and that will be a nuisance. But apart from the fridge humming, you will be able to enjoy the dynamic range of the music with the vocals and the majority of the sound. Of course, your 30 hertz will be a little bit compromised, but I can tell you guys that at 30 hertz, at 41 dB, you don't hear much. The hearing acuity is very, very low for the ear. You really need much higher levels at 30 dB to hear most of it. Actually, that's why like the fridge is mostly, it has a component around 50 hertz. So 30 hertz might be your AC. And if it's your AC, it won't be bothering. If it doesn't have mid-range components, it only at 12 dB, it won't be bothering that much your ability to enjoy the dynamic range of most of the material. And so that's it. So when someone throws a dB figure at you, it doesn't mean squat, because that exact 41 dB number can be heaven or hell, just like these two cases that I described before. And in the first room, where you have 41 dB in the mid-range, then you need that's like 29 dB difference compared to the second one. What does that mean? That in practice, it means you need an amplifier that has 1,000 times the wattage compared to the first room to enjoy the same dynamic range. I hope now you guys get it. Why in some cases flip power amp works and in other cases doesn't work. So for example, if you live in that scenario that your 41 dB falls predominantly in the mid-range, to have the same dynamic range as a 1 watt amplifier has in the other room, where in the mid-range you have only the 12 dB component, to have the same perceptible range of dynamic range in this range where it for only 12 falls there, a 1 watt amp, it's the same as 1000 watt amp in the one where you have a 41 dB range in the mid-range. So that's why it's you have to be aware and conscious of how much of that noise floor falls in that region where your hearing has the highest acuity. And that's why I suggest for everyone that do not just go for a blank SPL measurement. Do what I do myself. I use my cell phone. I put an app on the cell phone that's like an oscilloscope. So it shows the noise floor at every frequency. So I know like what is the noise floor spectrum. And you don't need to analyze it. You don't need to do a PhD on it. You just need to observe, where does the noise fall. If it falls like under 50 hertz, then it won't affect the dynamic range of your mid-range, and high frequencies will be thoroughly enjoyable. And when it falls like mostly below 50 hertz, there the noise floor, anything like below 50 dB, is your hearing acuity is so poor at those low frequencies that it's not going to significantly compromise your feeling of those energies, because at the 50 dB or 30 hertz, you can barely hear the music also. So you need maybe like an 80 dB at 50 hertz and to feel that 30 hertz component. And if there's a 50 dB noise floor, that won't bother your hearing, won't affect it that much. In contrast to the mid-range, where our hearing is a lot more sensitive, and if there you have like a 40 dB noise component, that will utterly and totally destroy anything that has, for example, human speech in it, or most of the instruments. So there's a lot of instruments like piano, for example, or violin, that have a lot of mid-range energy, but they also have lower frequencies and higher frequencies. And you would say, yeah, like then why is it a problem if in those cases the mid-range has problem if the high and low are clear, let's say. But it's still a problem, because even for a violin or for a piano, to enjoy the sound of that instrument, your brain, your ears need to hear a clear mid-range from that instrument. And if you don't get a clear mid-range, you don't get a dynamic range at the mid-range of the instrument, the perception will be very poor. And your brain will tell, actually the sound processing center of the brain will tell that part of the brain that tries to enjoy the music that, man, this is crap. That's what your sound processing center will tell if the mid-range is mucked up. And the reason for that is that about more than 2/3, some people say 90% of the brain's processing power is in the mid-range. Why? Because that's where we speak. That's what we use most. That's how living creatures work. What you use most, that is the most developed. And if there are problems there, even if you try to listen to bass or high frequencies, your brain doesn't let you enjoy it. Your brain lets only enjoy bass and highs if there's clarity in the mid-range. So I hope that this little episode is helpful about that. And I want everyone to relax your dependency on SPL. And whenever you read a number, just apply plus minus 20. So, because when you read that a room's noise floor is 41 dB, for your case, how that relates to you, it can be plus or minus 20 dB. Minus 20 dB is when the component, the majority of that noise was measured in the really deep frequencies, let's say like 30 hertz and under. And when you go higher, move higher, then it goes like to 41 dB. And usually most noise floors are not measured at the mid-range. Most of the component effect is in the low frequencies. But if it occurs at the 41 dB, then you can treat it as saying goodbye to audio experiences. And then I really recommend, if the noise floor is that high, just get closed earphones. And that's pretty much the only way to enjoy any dynamic range in that room, unless you are willing to listen to 110 dB SPLs. But then I don't recommend that, because in that case you will invariably damage your hearing, and I don't think that's the purpose. To me, maybe to you not, but to me the purpose of audio is not to destroy my own hearing, just to have pleasure in a room that is perfectly unsuitable for dynamic range. So in that case, if you have the misfortune to have a room where you have 41 dB and measured at the mid-range, my recommendation, if you can, put in soundproofing. It can vastly cut down on the SPLs. For example, the one that I put in my home, I use the Quiet Rock sound proofing panels. And not just that, but I also used green glue and vinyl, mass loaded vinyl as well, so triple layer, and it's roughly 65 dB, cuts the noise floor by 65 dB. So for example, what that means for me is that basically from the neighbors nothing is coming out, except in the very low frequency range, like 30 dB, 30 hertz, 20 hertz. Yes, it comes through, because that minus 65 dB applies at the mid-range, high frequencies. But really deep frequencies, you cannot do much, cannot do anything to isolate your neighbors or outside. Maybe if you have like a 2-meter thick stone wall, yeah, that will isolate. But we don't live in ancient mansions. I'm talking about real life houses. What can help you there? And if you cannot do that, cannot do anything about the rooms, I recommend what my audiophile buddy did to his penthouse in Chinatown at Honolulu. He boarded up the windows. Yes, so if you live in New York City or Tokyo or somewhere where it's like super loud, and you rent and you cannot put in like soundproofing, so you cannot take apart the house, then most of the noise comes through your window and your doors. So make sure that the door doesn't leak air around it. Put in a door or just seals around the door that seals, so that there's no noise coming through. And what my buddy did is that he boarded up his windows and put soundproofing material on it. And I was astounded when I went there, like, oh my God, this is super quiet in here. And he didn't even do anything to his walls. So have fun, enjoy, and use a lot of common sense. Bye-bye.